There are three pivotal moments in an empath's life, so psychologically destabilizing, so spiritually disorienting, that they often go unnoticed until it's too late. I've spent years researching these silent thresholds, not because they are loud or dramatic, but precisely because they aren't. They don't arrive as breakdowns, they arrive as patterns, subtle emotional exchanges, familiar relationship dynamics, everyday interactions that seem harmless on the surface, and yet they carry the hidden potential to erode the very core of one's identity. These are not just difficult seasons, they are psychological tipping points, moments of such profound internal disorientation that the empath begins to dissolve into the emotions, expectations, and energetic fields of others without even realizing it. I call them critical thresholds of psychic dissolution. What makes them so dangerous is their invisibility. No one warns you, no one prepares you. There is no map for the empath who wakes up one day and realizes they no longer know who they are beneath the role they've been playing for others. The boundaries are gone, the inner voice is muffled, and what's left is a quiet internal collapse that no one else can see. To the outside world, you're functioning just fine. You're kind, giving, and attentive. But inside, you're vanishing, slowly, painfully, and often permanently unless something intervenes. Without conscious awareness and a specific psychological protocol for survival, these moments can trap an empath in decades-long patterns of self-abandonment. Many either lose themselves entirely, blending so completely with others that their own needs vanish, or they go numb, shutting down their empathy altogether as a form of protection. But this is not what they were born for. Empathy is not a curse. It's a gift with boundaries, a superpower when rooted in self-awareness. And the only way to reclaim it is to first recognize the terrain that threatens to erase it. Today, we will illuminate these three hidden moments. We will uncover why they are so subtly devastating, and more importantly, we will walk through the survival protocol I've developed not to escape empathy, but to preserve it without losing yourself in the process. Because when the empath heals the core wound, something extraordinary happens. The gravitational pull that once attracted pain, chaos, and disconnection begins to flip. And for the first time, the empath stops attracting people who need saving and starts attracting those who recognize their soul. Throughout my life as a physician of the soul, I came to understand something that most of my contemporaries failed to grasp. There exists a category of individuals whose suffering cannot be explained by conventional pathology, whose distress does not originate from any diagnosable disorder, but rather from an existential sensitivity, an inner structure so finely tuned to the invisible currents of life that it exposes them to psychological threats no textbook could name. These individuals, whom I often encountered in my clinical practice, were not dysfunctional. On the contrary, they were often intelligent, intuitive, and deeply compassionate. But beneath their calm exteriors, they carried a burden that few could see. I came to recognize this hidden affliction through years of observing a specific type of person, the introverted intuitive with a dominant feeling function, what I came to call the feeling types. And it was through these encounters that I identified what I would later refer to as thresholds of unbearable knowing. Born in 1875 in Switzerland and trained initially in traditional medicine, my early years were shaped by an intellectual alliance with Sigmund Freud. However, I soon diverged from Freud's model as I felt it lacked the symbolic, spiritual, and archetypal dimensions of the psyche that I observed in my patients. My work on psychological types in 1921, and later in the development of personality in 1934, laid the foundation for a more expansive understanding of human consciousness, one that included the numinous, the archetypal, and the mystery of the unconscious. But beyond the theories and frameworks, it was my direct clinical work, first at the Burg Hülsli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich, and later in my private practice, that revealed to me a pattern I could not ignore. Over and over, I witnessed highly empathic individuals arrive at my door in quiet distress, unable to articulate what was unraveling within them, yet sensing with deep certainty that something essential had broken open. They came not with symptoms in the classical sense, but with metaphysical fatigue, a hollowing out, a dissolving of inner boundaries. Many described the sensation of being absorbed into others' needs, of feeling emotionally invaded, or of living in a fog where their own identity blurred into the emotional landscapes of those around them. No matter how high-functioning they were externally, they were often caught in a form of silent suffering, a psychic quicksand that intensified when they tried to be strong or help others without tending to themselves. I listened to these stories again and again, until I could no longer see them as isolated occurrences. These were not merely emotional downturns. They were spiritual ruptures, psychic emergencies, and how these individuals navigated such moments would determine whether they continued their soul's journey toward wholeness or remained trapped in what I called unconscious identification, where one lives through others' stories rather than their own. I came to understand that these empathic souls were not simply kind-hearted. They were physically porous. They possessed what I described as psychic permeability, an unusually thin membrane between their own unconscious and that of the collective. This rare configuration allowed them to sense what others could not. They could detect deception without evidence, feel sorrow that was not their own, and attune to the emotional atmosphere of a room with almost clairvoyant accuracy. While modern culture often romanticizes such intuition, I did not. I regarded it as both a gift and a danger. A person so exposed to the unconscious currents of others must, by necessity, develop sophisticated psychic defenses or risk being swallowed by what they absorb. To be empathic in this way is to live with a kind of sacred vulnerability. It is to walk through the world without armor, yet be expected to carry the pain of others with grace. That is why, before we explore the three moments that can either break or awaken the empath, we must first redefine empathy, not as a soft personality trait, but as a complex psychological phenomenon, one that, if not understood, can become a slow erosion of the self. But if understood, it can become the very path to individuation and inner transformation. The first critical threshold I have come to define in the empath's inner transformation is what I call the recognition of non-reciprocity. It does not arrive with thunder or rupture. It slips in quietly, cloaked in the most mundane details of everyday life, subtle emotional exchanges unnoticed until they pierce the soul like glass in water. This moment does not simply expose that someone is less empathic than you. No, that realization is ordinary. This moment is different. It is a collapse, a psychic revelation that breaks the spell you have unknowingly lived under. You suddenly realize that your entire relational architecture was constructed on a projection, one in which you believed that empathy, when given purely and consistently, would be naturally returned, not out of obligation, not out of performance, but out of shared human capacity. And yet, with unbearable clarity, you awaken to the truth. Your empathy was never truly met. Not because others are unkind or intentionally dismissive, but because they do not possess the same depth of perception, the same soul reflex to attune. You feel as though the veil has been ripped from your eyes. You look back and see the evidence was always there. The late replies, the shallow responses, the subtle withdrawal when you needed them most. What you once excused as forgetfulness or busyness now reveals itself as a fundamental incapacity for mutual resonance. This is not a petty realization. It is soul-shattering because it pulls the ground from beneath your most sacred illusions. You realize that your most vulnerable expressions were held in spaces that could not truly receive them. You have not just loved deeply, you have given yourself as a sanctuary to those who would never become a sanctuary for you. I once wrote about this in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, through the story of a woman whose revelation came during what she thought would be a moment of closeness. After years of nurturing, listening, and holding emotional space for a close friend, she reached out during a personal crisis. The response she received was not cruelty, but indifference, a soft dismissal, averted gaze, a shallow platitude. But it wasn't that moment that broke her. It was the realization that this was never new. The imbalance had always existed. She had simply been so focused on giving that she never paused to observe what was not given in return. This was the moment the mirror shattered, not just the friendship, but the illusion of emotional symmetry. Such a realization is deadly to the empathic soul because it forces you to confront an existential fear, that you may be surrounded by people yet remain emotionally unseen, spiritually unfelt. You are not physically isolated, but psychologically alone. What surrounds you is not reciprocal exchanges, but one-sided rituals, performances where you offer depth, presence, and containment, and others consume it as a resource, not a relationship. I call this moment the removal of projection, where the veil you unknowingly cast onto others, imagining they feel as you feel, is lifted, and what stands underneath is not always malicious, but undeniably misaligned. The danger of this threshold is not only the pain of seeing clearly, but the conclusions that follow. I have witnessed empathic individuals collapse into two extremes, self-blame or hardened withdrawal. Some believe they were not worthy of reciprocation, while others decide that no one is truly capable of it. Both are distortions. Both are shadows of the same wound, psychic inflation followed by deflation. You once believed your empathy could transform others by sheer force of giving. Now you believe it was all for nothing. But neither is true. The answer is not to shrink nor to harden, but to discern. In psychological types, I proposed a path I called conscious discrimination, a survival protocol for the empath. It is not judgment, but discernment. It is the ability to recognize different levels of emotional capacity in others without moralizing them. You wouldn't plant orchids in desert soil and blame the soil when they do not bloom. You'd understand the mismatch. So too with relationships. When you encounter someone who cannot meet you emotionally, it is not your failure nor theirs. It is a signal to reallocate your sacred energy. This protocol asks you to observe, not explain, to calibrate, not overextend, to gently withdraw where depth cannot be met, and to seek, not demand, relationships where the soul can echo back. This is how the empath begins to reclaim power, not through control or withdrawal, but through soulful clarity. And in that clarity, a new kind of attraction emerges, one that does not pull you into imbalance, but invites you into resonance. The second perilous threshold I uncovered in the empath's journey is far more insidious than the first, precisely because it arrives without drama. It unfolds in slow motion, cloaked in kindness, compromise, and the daily performance of emotional caretaking. I call it the dissolution of self through perpetual accommodation. This is not a dramatic shattering, but a quiet erosion of identity, where the empath, over time, becomes so attuned to the needs of others, so skilled at meeting expectations and maintaining harmony, that they begin to lose sight of their own inner contours. Preferences become vague memories. Desires dissolve into obligations. Authentic feelings are replaced with conditioned responses. Until one day someone asks, "What do you really want?" And the question does not land as a call to truth, but as a terrifying void. There is no answer, only silence. This moment is psychologically devastating, not because of the question itself, but because it exposes the hollowness left behind when a person has spent too long disappearing into roles. In my analytic framework, I describe this as the shadow consequence of the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. For most, the persona is a healthy adaptation, but for the deeply empathic, the mask multiplies. One version for the family, one for colleagues, another for friends. Each one is calibrated to regulate the emotional weather of those around them. The cost? The original face, the true self, fades beneath the surface. One woman once told me, "I feel like a hologram. People see me, talk to me, rely on me, but there's nothing solid to hold on to. If you reached out to touch me, your hand would pass through." I carried this image into my later work as a haunting metaphor for advanced persona identification. What makes this stage so dangerous is not only the loss of selfhood, but also what happens next. Once the empath awakens to the truth that their identity has been shaped entirely by others, a reactive pendulum often swings. They begin to say no, to resist, to rebel. But if this rebellion is unconscious, it becomes its own trap. In Jungian terms, this is what I called enantiodromia, the tendency of things taken to an extreme to turn into their opposite. The accommodating empath becomes rigid, aggressive, or dismissive, believing they are reclaiming themselves. But this, too, is a false self, a shadow reaction, not a true recovery. That is why I created a survival protocol I called active imagination in service of self-recovery. This process asks the empath to stop performing and begin listening, not to others, but to their own inner voice, the one buried under years of noise. In the practice, one learns to ask simple but radical questions like, "What do I enjoy?" or "Do I truly want this?" and then sit in the discomfort as the trained responses rush in. The voices of obligation, guilt, and performance will be loud, but beneath them, if one waits with patience and compassion, a whisper will emerge. That whisper is the authentic self. And here lies the most difficult part, the willingness to disappoint, to say no, to let people down, to be seen as inconsistent or selfish, because only in risking rejection can the true self be reclaimed. I know this, not only from my patients, but from my own life. After my break with Freud, I faced this same dissolution. I had contorted my views to preserve our connection. When it ended, I realized I did not know what I truly believed. Years of active imagination followed, silent dialogue with my soul. From that darkness emerged my clearest insights, my survival, my voice. This recovery is not theoretical. It is lived. Imagine this. You are invited to a gathering. The old pattern says yes without thought. The survival protocol says pause. Ask, do I want to go? Not, should I? Not, what will they think? But simply, do I desire this? And then wait. If the answer is no, honor it. Let the confusion come, let the guilt arise, and walk anyway toward your truth. This is the path back to wholeness, not through rebellion, but through resonance. There comes a moment in every empath's life that quietly ruptures their understanding of connection, an inward shattering not marked by betrayal or loss, but by the realization that even in love, even in presence, there exists an invisible boundary no one can cross. I call this the recognition of fundamental aloneness. It is not the surface-level loneliness one feels in moments of rejection or unreciprocated effort. It is a deeper, more existential solitude that arises when you understand that no matter how deeply another person loves you, no matter how open the channel of communication seems, they can never fully enter your internal world. They can care, they can try, but they will never fully see with your eyes, feel with your body, or grasp the full texture of your emotional reality. For the empath who has spent their life decoding the moods of others, absorbing their unspoken feelings, and believing that this intuitive depth could and would eventually be mirrored back, this realization is not just painful, it is disorienting. It is the collapse of an unconscious contract. If I can feel them, surely they can feel me. But in this moment, you discover the irreversible truth that consciousness is a solitary chamber. You live within your own psychic interior, and no matter how beautifully someone tries to echo your pain or celebrate your joy, they can never fully inhabit your mind or your emotional complexity. The gap between self and other, once imagined as bridgeable, now reveals itself as permanent. I explored this reality in depth in my writings, especially in The Undiscovered Self, where I stated, the individual is not only a single separate being, but also by nature a social being. As a separate being, he is absolutely alone. And the more one awakens to the truth of their own psyche, the more this solitude becomes evident. This isn't despair, it's a psychological rite of passage. The empath must walk through this recognition, not to resign from connection, but to reconstruct it from a deeper truth. When empaths reach this moment, some describe it as standing behind glass, able to see the world, but no longer able to touch it in the way they once believed possible. Others say it feels like speaking a language that no one else fully understands, despite their efforts to translate it. The tragedy here isn't that people don't care, it's that the architecture of human perception itself limits the reach of even the most compassionate heart. That realization is what makes this moment spiritually dangerous. Many respond by retreating, psychologically withdrawing to protect the last remnants of their inner world. They stop reaching, stop explaining, stop hoping to be understood. But this, I have found, is not protection. It is psychological starvation. To survive this passage, one must learn what I call the acceptance of the paradox. It is both true that we are fundamentally alone in our consciousness and that genuine connection is still meaningful and possible. This is not a contradiction to be resolved. It is a dual reality to be lived. In Mysterium Coniunctionis, I proposed that maturity comes when the individual learns to hold paradox without collapsing into one pole or the other. We must relinquish the need to be fully known and instead cherish the beauty of being partially understood. We must stop demanding perfect resonance and instead learn to hear the music that still plays through the dissonance. Practically, this looks like releasing both yourself and the other from the impossible burden of complete comprehension. When someone you love tries to understand you but cannot fully grasp what you're expressing, instead of spiraling into frustration or despair, you might say, "I don't think I'm explaining this in a way you can fully grasp, and that's okay. I'm grateful for your effort." In doing so, you make space for an imperfect but sincere communion. The connection is not broken by the gap, it is made sacred by your willingness to remain within it. This survival protocol also demands the cultivation of self-companionship. If you are the only true inhabitant of your inner world, then you must become your own most faithful companion. This is not self-centeredness. It is psychological integrity. You begin to build an internal dialogue rich with self-awareness, curiosity, and compassion. You stop seeking wholeness outside of yourself and become a sanctuary within. As I once wrote in Psychological Types, whoever looks outside dreams, whoever looks inside awakens. This awakening is the empath's turning point. For when you no longer seek to be completed or perfectly mirrored, but rather to walk beside another soul with shared reverence for the unbridgeable mystery between you, then love becomes something deeper. Not fusion, not fixing, but fellowship. You walk your parallel path, whole within yourself, and yet profoundly open to the presence of another. That is not despair, that is freedom. What you call tempered empathy is, in truth, the gold born from inner fire. It is not the innocence you began with, but the wisdom you forged when innocence was no longer enough. Those who survive these three crucibles, non-reciprocity, self-dissolution, and existential aloneness, emerge not weaker, but wiser. What I have long called tempered empathy is not soft or passive. It is the kind of empathy that has walked through flame and learned to feel without disappearing. It contains within it the paradox of care and boundary, openness and discernment, love and self-preservation. Unlike the raw empathy that led to collapse, this is a conscious force. It is sustainable because it is no longer naive. It no longer demands the illusion of perfect harmony, but accepts the reality of human limitation and still chooses to remain present. This kind of empathy selects. It does not pour itself blindly into every vessel. It recognizes that not all containers are worthy and not all thirsts are yours to quench. You learn the sacred discipline of energetic economy, the first survival protocol, by practicing discernment that does not demonize, but wisely protects. This empathy also holds boundaries. You stay with yourself even as you reach toward another. You stop abandoning your center in the name of connection. You stop leaking into every space that demands you. You recover the inner voice you once muted, which now becomes your compass, the second survival protocol. And finally, this empathy accepts the loneliness that once shattered you. It does not run from the ache of separateness, but bows to it. It honors the partial nature of human understanding. It accepts that no one will ever fully know you, and it stops needing them to. This is the third survival protocol, and perhaps the deepest. I have called those who reach this place wounded healers. They are not unscarred, but they have metabolized the pain. They carry the maps of dark terrain because they have walked it alone. They do not save others by force, but by presence. By becoming a living testimony that one can descend and return, transformed but intact. Late in life, I wrote a line to a patient overwhelmed by empathy. You cannot save anyone. You can only light the path with your own example. And to light the path, you must first survive the darkness yourself. That, to me, is the essence of healing. You are not here to fix others. You are here to illuminate what is possible. These three deadly moments are not mistakes. They are not interruptions to your healing. They are your healing. Each one breaks the illusion that kept you small and initiates you into something vaster, stronger, and more whole. The moment you name the darkness you are in, whether it is the realization of non-reciprocity, the collapse of your own identity, or the aching truth that no one else can fully complete you, you reclaim your power. Consciousness gives shape to chaos. Naming the moment is the first act of mastery. But even more crucial is witnessing. Having someone, whether a therapist, a friend, or your own higher self, who simply holds you in the storm without needing to rescue you. The witness reminds you that this pain is real, but not final, that this threshold is hard, but sacred. I myself crossed such a threshold when I separated from Freud and entered the deepest solitude of my life. I faced abandonment, ego death, and terrifying isolation. But I stayed. I dialogued with my unconscious through the Red Book. I created ritual and structure in the outer world, while my inner world broke and reformed. And I trusted, through no evidence, that meaning was being born in the madness. Looking back, I now see that what I survived became the scaffolding for my greatest contribution. The same is possible for you. You are not disintegrating. You are being disrobed of illusion. You are not fragile. You are undergoing alchemical pressure. You are not broken. You are being initiated. So if you feel like you are losing yourself, remember, you are meeting the parts of yourself you had long abandoned. And the self that emerges on the other side will not just feel deeply, but stand firmly. That is the gift of the empath who heals, the capacity to hold others with an open heart while never again losing yourself in the process. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.